The Newsday continues here on One News Now. I'm Danny Laurel. Now here are the biggest stories on the economic and corporate front. Senator Chiz Escudero has expressed opposition to the current version of the Maharlika Investment Fund bill. In an interview with 1PH, Escudero said the MIF measures filed at both chambers of Congress need more fine-tuning. He particularly questioned the lack of provision for the return of investments of financial institutions in the proposed fund.
Ni isang probisyon, ni isang salita sa batas na pinanukala sa Kamara Mano sa Senado, walang nakalagay kung magkano ba ang balik sa Land Bank o sa DBP. Paano ba naman yun? Pinwersa niyo maglagay ng pera tapos wala man lang balik, wala man lang return on investment, wala man lang garantiya sa return on investment. Hindi naman po yata tama at makatarungan yun.
The senator added that they are now looking at other possible sources of funds for the MIF aside from government-owned banks.
Napakaraming pwedeng pagkunan, kailangan lang ng konting pag-aaral at konting sipag. Tinatapos lang namin, ilalahad namin sa mga susunod na araw dahil bilang patunay ito, Joby, na hindi naman ako tutol sa konsepto ng sovereign fund. Ayusin lang nila, itama lang nila, pag-aralan lang nila ng husto.
The national government ended 2022 with a 13.42 trillion peso debt pile. This outstanding debt was more than 14% higher than the 11.7 trillion peso figure recorded at the end of 2021. This brought the debt to GDP ratio to 60.9%, that's slightly higher than the 60.5% print recorded in 2021. But on a month-to-month basis, the national debt decreased by 225 billion pesos from the record high 13.64 trillion pesos recorded at the end of November. Now, the Treasury says this was in part due to the strength of the peso. The debt-to-GDP ratio also decreased from 63.7% logged in the third quarter. Now, here to help us digest our debt situation and what we can do about it, we have with us Professor Manuel Leyco, President of the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila. Good morning, Prof.
Good morning, Danny, and thanks for having me back.
Prof. Leyco, the debt is jumping at least by 14% since last year, 2022 versus 2021. First of all, was this expected? And second of all, is this worrying?
Well, when they redeem some of our debt, that is good for our debt profile. But I think if we continue to look at our budget cycle, we will continue to go back to the debt market and borrow more money. So as a temporary situation for the Philippines, we redeemed over 200 billion pesos of debt, plus the appreciation of the peso somewhat also helped us in our debt profile, improving our debt profile. But at 60% of our GDP, that is still high, and I hope that the debt ratio will improve further and bring it back down to the usual 50% that we were experiencing for quite some time.
Okay, so sir, can you still say that at the moment we have not yet, or we're still far away from paying our pandemic-induced debt? And it's so, where are we in terms of being able to pay that back and, like you mentioned, go back to the 50% or normalized levels?
I think the debt schedule will tell us when we will be able to go back to the pre-pandemic levels and redeem the debt that we incurred during the time when we were buying vaccines and the time we were preparing our local governments and the national government to face COVID. That really cost us a lot of money during this pandemic, and that schedule, I think we will see that in the next few months and years, I guess. But what is crucial now is that the current fiscal plans of our government also figures we will go back to the debt market and borrow some money to finance our expenditures for this year.
Sir, can you say with confidence that we are using the debt, or the government is using the debt to grow already and not just to refinance?
Well, I hope that we are using new money for new projects, but it looks like we are also refinancing old debt with new debt. So
Okay.
that is not good. Well, if the interest rates are good or better, we can do refinancing, but the interest rates are not good like we used to see 2 years ago.
Question, sir, it's now the time for the Maharlika Fund. Ika nga, we need money. And that's what the government has been saying. We need to tap some sources. Is this a possible source for us to be able to use for development plans, as you mentioned?
I think the government will have to make up its mind. Will the Maharlika Fund be an equity invitation, or is this going to be a debt invitation? And therefore, we will have to make sure that this is part of our debt financing or our equity financing. But as it is, we are the ones financing Maharlika Fund. And then we will invest it, and hopefully we will be able to make more money than we would if we invested it somewhere else. But right now, if we use old money, Land Bank, DBP, and other funds of the government, that's not exactly the usual definition of a sovereign fund. If we have operating revenues or excess earnings, that we can put in our investments here and abroad. But it looks like it's not really an equity financing. It's not even an excess revenue financing. So I'm not exactly sure what the Maharlika Fund is looking like right now.
Okay, so still some deliberations on where the money will come from and actually what the objectives are, as we illustrated also a while ago. Now, sir, apart from the possible raising of money or return on investment from that fund, is now the time for more levies or taxes to increase government revenues, especially at a time where inflation continues to be red hot?
That depends. If it's a consumption tax, that will hurt the people more, especially at this high inflation environment. But if it's going to be a wealth tax, that will be better than consumption. However, that will also raise a lot of objection from people who are keeping their money in wealth assets. So it will be a very tight rope that the government will have to walk, whether to tax the rich or tax the poor, use consumption or wealth tax. I think that will be the call of the government. But right now, if they go for consumption taxes, that will hurt the people who are already shouldering the heavy burden of high inflation in the country.
Okay, sir, on the GDP growth numbers for the fourth quarter of last year or full year, some are saying, higher, above expectation despite the fact of 14-year high inflation. Some are also saying, well, we did come from double-digit contraction at our worst in pandemic, so this is just expected. Your take on that? Is real growth happening already more than just revenge spending?
Well, I'd like to see it more as a recovery so that we can use the proper or appropriate base references. But if we are looking at comparing our growth, so-called growth today versus last year, that is not exactly realistic. We should go back to the pre-pandemic levels and see how much we have recovered in terms of what we lost in 2020. So right now, 7+ growth rate is not exactly bringing us back to the pre-pandemic levels yet.
Okay.
We are on our way, but we are not there yet.
Okay. And sir, what's your outlook on this year? Secretary Diokno said inflation has peaked, expects it to be 4.5% this year. If consumption is going to be the same, do you believe that this year will be a bit stronger, especially if prices are not as high? What is your outlook on the growth, especially with China as well reopening, some positive things even in the US, inflation also going down there hopefully? Would this have more positive effects for us this year?
If we don't factor in global recession, it would look fine for the Philippines. However, the looming global recession is very real. We're quite lucky that while the contraction is not happening yet, but the slowdown is already showing in Europe, and I think even in the US, slowdown in consumer spending is also beginning to show.
Okay.
So
we will have to hold our expectations and be more real and be prepared. Should recession happen in the Philippines, be prepared to face unemployment, high prices, and therefore our budget should be perhaps readjusted even during the year this year.
All right, so still needing to tighten our belts here. As of course, like you mentioned, some bright spots, but still also some risks on the table in the new year. Thank you so much for those insights, Professor Emmanuel Leyco, President of the Pamantasan ng Lungsod ng Maynila. Thank you, sir.
Thank you and good afternoon.
We'll be back with more stories after the break. Keep it here on One News. You're still watching One News Now. I'm Danny Laurel. A 29 billion peso budget is needed to deliver electricity in all households nationwide. That is according to the National Electrification Administration. NEA said around 600,000 households in the main grid and 23,000 in off-grid areas are still without power supply. The agency called on Congress to provide more budgetary support for its Sitio electrification plan. Now, without enough funding, the NEA aims to achieve its full rural electrification target in the next 5 years. Recovery in the country's property space is expected to continue this year. The Collier says it is projecting a positive net take-up, which means occupied spaces will outpace vacated spaces. The company expects net take-up to reach 228,000 square meters this year. Now, business process outsourcing firms are expected to drive office space demand. Despite the implementation of work-from-home or hybrid work setups, Colliers notes a substantial demand from BPO firms, particularly those from the healthcare service segment. And Netflix will soon roll out its password sharing rules. Here's what we need to know, courtesy of Bloomberg's Carolyn Hyde and Ed Ludlow.
Netflix password sharing. Why are we all freaking out about it? Okay, let's get to the facts, because last year, Netflix told us more than 100 million households currently use memberships of Netflix. They don't pay for it. And they wanted to crack down on this password sharing, probably coming into effect in the end of the first quarter. That means by March. Now, why are we all freaking out right here, right now? Well, they've already been trialing ways to curtail password sharing over in Latin America, in 3 key countries, in fact, Peru, Chile, Costa Rica. And they put out a helpful article to tell users in those countries about some of the changes, but they published it in every single region. So that's why we're all worrying about it. So what are we seeing being trialled in those 3 countries? Well, the users are being asked to set a primary location for where they use Netflix on their devices. And then Netflix will track a mixture of IP addresses or device IDs, account activity, to see if anyone outside the household is using that password. And you're going to be incentivized to add members to your own household if you want them to be using it. You've got to pay up. Now, right here in the US, take a deep breath. Nothing is exactly happening at this moment. But what's clear is Netflix is going to have to use all of its storytelling skills to get you and I on board with these changes.
Oh, Ed, the furor, the outrage that was across Instagram, that was across Twitter, as people got this the wrong way round, thought it was being enacted in the US immediately. And what was so ironic, I suppose, is actually Netflix had some strong news coming out on Wednesday. They wanted to talk about Netflix spatial audio, an amount of more devices if you have the premium Netflix subscription. And instead it got drowned out by this.
We thought this would be ads, the story for Netflix, right? Ad-supported tier. But 2023 is about password sharing. And Greg Peters, before he was promoted to co-CEO, that was his project. He was out there trying to crack this problem, whether he does it or not. I mean, this was a really fascinating reaction.
It really was. And I think now we're going to have to hear from Netflix about how this might be enacted, the trials that were going on, and what it's actually going to mean for you and me eventually in the US. Remember back in 2017, they were saying it was all about password sharing. Now it's a very different matter when it comes to numbers.
For more updates, visit News 5, the Philippine Star, and Business World Online. Visit our website, onenews.ph, for more in-depth analysis. You can also catch One News on the Signal Play app. Register for a free account now. That's www.signalplay.com, and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Danny Laurel. Join us again at 2 p.m. We are One News, all sides, all the time.